Well, well, what has the cat dragged in today? It's a video tutorial on stealth games. In this video, we're going to take a look at setting up our victory and loss conditions. So we'll be getting our goal placed on the chicken, and we'll be doing something with this little detection sphere that we have on the foot of our guard. Now, before we get into that, I want to think for a moment, how do I want to handle winning and losing the game? What are the steps that need to be taken? So I'm going to want to display a you win or a you lose, much like, how we did with Plinko, only there was no you lose there. It was just a you win. So I'm going to need to get two canvases set up, one with a you win text and one with a you lose text. I'm also going to need to make sure that the player can no longer move and that the enemies stop moving and rotating as well, regardless win-loss. So there's just going to have to be some things I'm going to have to change and modify to get this working the way I want it to. But before we get into the code, let's go ahead and knock out those two canvases real quick. So I am going to right-click UI canvas, and I will call this the victory canvas. Switch my scene to 2D, double click on canvas so we're zoomed out, and we're ready to go. All right, so I'm going to add a text box onto this. So right click UI text, which I will call LBL victory. Again, the LBL is just my personal naming convention for text that doesn't change. And I want this to be fairly big, so I'm going to crank the size up on this, recenter it. I want my text to be centered in this box. So again, just down here on the paragraph alignment, I clicked on the center buttons. And we'll do this in 2 lines. You win. And let's crank that font size up. How big can we make it? 130 points. That sounds reasonable. Switch over to game. Let's just real quick maximize. See how that looks. It looks reasonable, although I might want a little bit more contrast on the text. Remove maximize, and let's take a look. Here it is, color. There you go. Nice red. I like red. Obviously, the different color is a personal little nitpick. You don't have to change the color. All right, so there we go. There is you win. Now, losing's pretty much going to be the same thing. So let me duplicate this victory canvas. So I'm going to select it and Control-D, duplicate. I'm then going to turn off the victory canvas game object. I'm going to go to the duplicated version. I'm going to rename this to the loss canvas. Or I suppose I could also say defeat, but loss works. Expand this out. I'm going to rename my label. And I'll change the text to you enter lose. Okay, excellent. Canvas is done. Get those both turned off. Let's get our game logic put in. Just like what we did with the Plinko, I'm going to create a game logic game object, which I will then place a game logic component on it. And that's going to be sort of the nanny game object that everybody else knows how to find this, and they can report information to and check to see, what the status of the game is. So I am going to create an empty game object, Control-Shift-N, which I shall call game logic. Not that it matters, but I am going to reset my position because it's always a good thing to do. I'm also going to switch over here to scene and get back to the scene view. I just double clicked on the enemy to focus on him. All right, so there's my game logic. I need yet another script. So in my scripts folder, which I'm already in there from last time, I'm going to right click, create C#, and this is going to be game logic. And then of course I'm going to open that up in Visual Studio. As always, pause the video if you need to allow Visual Studio time to load up. Now, what do I need out of game logic? Well, first, I know that I'm going to need references to those canvases, right? Because I'm going to need to be able to turn on the appropriate canvas, win or lose. So that's my first starting point here. So public canvas victory and public canvas defeat. What else am I going to need to know? Well, I need some way of informing all of the enemies that they're not supposed to move anymore, and informing the player that the player's not supposed to move anymore. Now, there's a lot of different ways that we could go about doing this. Some of them very elegant, although a bit complicated on the code side. We're not going to do that. We're going to brute force this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a public bool can move, which will default to being true. So what this means is everybody's going to have a reference to game logic, which means that everybody's going to be able to look at game logic and say, yo, game logic, am I allowed to move? Oh, yes? Excellent. Then I will. Otherwise, I won't. So that's what we're going to do with this variable here. Now, for game logic, we don't actually need a start or an update method. I'm going to go ahead and nuke both of these. Because what's going to happen here is we're going to just put in two public methods. We're going to say public void win game and public void lose game. And then if we win game, we can call this the win game method. And if we lose the game, we can call the lose game method. And what we're going to do in these methods is going to be pretty straightforward, almost identical. In both of them, we are going to set can move to be false. Because win or lose, everybody stops moving. Next, we will set active the appropriate canvas. So in win game, we will tell the victory canvas oh, right. And it shouldn't be a canvas. Despite the number of times I have done and practiced this video, I always make this mistake. We always have to keep in mind the difference between the component that we're working with and the game object that we are working with. Yes, it's true that there is a canvas attached to the game object, but right, of course, it's going to be a compile. That's not what I disabled. What I disabled was the game object. And so I'm just going to change these canvas references to game objects, because that's actually what I want. And now I can say victory.setActive true for winning the game. And I can set defeat, not default, defeat, setActive to true for losing the game. And that's all we need to do in game logic. We call win game, lose game, and check to see if we're allowed to move. So let's do the can move part first. So I'm going to come in here to enemy controller. And I am going to check. If I can't move, I basically want to bail out of update. So I'm going to ask the question, if can, oops, no, actually no, I'm skipping steps. Because I can't ask the question right yet because I don't have a reference to game logic. Now, I am just going to do game logic. Notice that I'm not doing public here. The reason being is, let's say that I have a level with 50 guards. I don't want to have to hook up each one of those 50 guards to game logic. That's asking for trouble. I'm gonna miss one of them. So rather than hooking up the reference in the editor, I am going to use the start method and GameObject.find. So I am going to say that GameLogic with a lowercase g, thank you very much, is going to be equal to GameObject.find. There's lots of ways that we can find game objects. In this particular case, I'm going to find the game object called GameLogic. And once I find that, I need to get the GameLogic component off of it. Ah, I have a stray parentheses in there. And there we go. GameLogic equals GameObject.find. So I'm going to search for a game object called GameLogic. Once I find that game object, I'm going to get the component GameLogic and remember that reference. This way, doesn't matter whether I have 5 enemies or 500 enemies in the scene, they're all going to be correctly linked up to GameLogic. Now I can ask the question, if, with a correct direction of parentheses, if GameLogic.canMove is equal to false, what do I want to do? Actually, there's two things that I would want to do here. One is I want to set my animator speed to 0. So I'm just going to grab this line here because I don't want anybody animating either. And then upon doing that, I'm just going to bail out of the whole method. If you put in a return semicolon, which is what you do for a void method, basically as soon as it hits this line, it's going to bail out. Now, as a word of warning, you can put a return statement anywhere inside a method. You can have multiple return statements inside of method if you've got branching logic. I would strongly recommend that you not do that. If you are going to use return, I would only ever use it as like the very first thing that a method checks. Basically saying, is the conditions right for me to execute this code? No? Okay, bail out on the whole thing. Don't have multiple return statements in a method because that can become very difficult to try to debug. Now, I'm going to basically want to have the exact same code in my player as well. So I'm just going to grab this whole if statement here, hop over to the player controller, and dump it in. Of course, I'm going to get red squiggles of doom here in a moment because I haven't set up game logic yet, but it's the same principle. And again, for the player, I don't really want to worry about having to set up game logic every time. So I am going to just find and store it that way. since I'm lazy, I'm going to do a copy paste. Like I said, you got to be careful with copy paste, but it can save you time if you're paying attention. Now, I have done a little bit of refactoring, so I do want to save, hop over to Unity, and I just want to do a quick check to make sure that nothing's broken. I should still be able to move, and the AI should still be able to rotate and chase me. Obviously, nothing's gonna, the win-lose screens aren't going to pop up yet. Ah, null reference exceptions. Why? Oh, yeah. That would be because I have the game object and I forgot to actually put the code on it. And of course, while I'm here, before I forget, because I will if I don't do it now, hook up my canvases. Now it should work. And yep, there we go. AI is rotating. Doesn't chase me behind the wall. It chases me outside of the wall. Excellent. Everything's working as intended. Let's win first, because that's easier. What I'm going to do is on the chicken, I am going to add a collision sphere to it. I'm not actually going to do a visualization on the chicken. I'm just going to add a sphere collider. So on the chicken, I'm going to add a component, and I want a sphere collider. And yeah, that looks pretty decent. And I'm going to make that a trigger. Now, where do I want to put the code for running into this? I could put it on the chicken. I could put it on the player. The player doesn't have any on-trigger enter. And so, to my mind, it makes more sense to put it on the player. It's not that the chicken is doing anything to the player or that the chicken's really doing anything to the game state. It's the player running into the chicken. And by the player doing that, that's what's triggering the victory. So that's where the code should go, at least in my logic. So I'm going to go to the player controller, scroll down, and I'm going to put in an on trigger enter. Now, I want to make sure that the trigger that I'm entering is the right one, because remember, the vision cone's also a trigger. I don't want to win the game because the vision cone hit me. So I'm going to need to use another tag. So I'm going to ask the question if other.tag is equal to goal. Now the goal tag does not exist. We're going to have to go back and create that. What do I do if I hit the goal tag? Well, I'm going to notify game logic. I'll say lowercase g, thank you very much, autocomplete, that we have won the game. And that's it. That's all I need to do here. And yeah, that's all we need to do. I mean, it's once you get past certain hurdles, things can start, moving along pretty swiftly in terms of getting stuff implemented. So now I can go back to Unity. Make sure you've saved. So yep, I've saved. I don't have my little asterisk. So heading back over to Unity. I need to make sure that I have a goal tag applied to the chicken, which does not exist. So I am going to go into my project settings. I'm going to go to my tags and layers, or conversely, we could also just select the chicken, go to tag, and add tag. I mean, either way is going to get us to this point. Expand out tags. I'm going to add to the list. I'm going to add the goal tag. Go back to the chicken and make sure I set the tag. Now I can test. And make sure I can see the AI. And yep, okay. AI is no longer rotating. I can no longer move. I don't know if you can. I don't know whether or not you can hear the keyboard or not, but yep, I can't move. So yay, victory condition complete. Now the loss condition is going to be a bit more interesting because we can't use the on trigger enter. Or rather, we could, but it would be very, very persnickety. See, there's no way to know which trigger volume is triggering this message. We have two trigger volumes on our guard, on our enemy. We have the vision cone and we have the game over sphere. Which one sent the message? There's no way to find out. And so we could try to do some fiddly calculations. It's like, okay, was it the player? How close is the player? If the player's within a certain range, then maybe in the game. But it's really kind of fiddly. It would actually be a lot smoother just to add on another piece of code directly onto the detection object. Because there's nothing about the game over detection that needs to immediately and directly impact the AI. We're setting the move speed. You know, if we can't move, we're setting the move speed to 0. And that's really about all we need to do. Thinking on it, we always have to think about edge cases. Like, what happens if we have an AI chasing us and we grab the chicken? The AI will continue to move until we tell it to stop. Just simply setting the move speed just changes the animation. It won't actually stop the AI. So we should tell the agent is stopped equals true. So if GameLogic.canMove is false, we turn off our animations, or should I say that, pardon me, we make sure that we're not playing our run animation, and we make sure that we're not following a path, that we're stopped. So let's add in one last code file. So in my scripts folder, right-click, create, C#. I'll call this player detection. And I will add this to the detect game object. Because with this code directly on this collider, it's not going to get a collision message from vision. But the code that's here, the enemy controller, will get messages from both vision and detect. So we do not want that. Open up player detection. Now, this is going to need to know about game logic, because if a player enters this collision sphere, we need to tell the game logic that we have lost. So, same thing we've been doing with start. So I'm actually just going to come over here and grab this line again out of start. So Control C. I'm over here. I'm going to have a game logic, and then plonk that line of code into start. Nothing I need to do an update. So I'm just going to get rid of that. And then I'm going to add an on-trigger enter. Just like pretty much everything else we've been doing so far in this project, I only care about the player entering this trigger. So I will ask the question if other.tag is equal to player. And if that is true, I am going to tell GameLogic that we have lost the game. And that is all we need to do. Let's go ahead and test. And I'm caught. Huzzah! I can't move. He's not rotating. He's not running. And that's it. Game complete. Not content complete, mind you, but all of our logic is there. Which, by the way, for those of you curious, I would say that we would be ready to enter the... We have completed the alpha stage of development, and we're working on the beta stage of development. Alpha means, generally speaking, feature complete. We're feature complete at this point, but we're not content complete, and that's what the next video is going to focus on. Now, before we go over there to the next video, just a quick note on some things that can go wrong. If you walk into the chicken and you don't get the you win, there could be a couple of things causing that. One, make sure that the chicken is set to the sphere collider, is set as a trigger. And also make sure that the chicken's tag is set to goal. As always, check your console to see whether or not you have red messages of doom. For example, maybe you forgot, and don't do this next step, by the way. Maybe you forgot to link up your victory canvas. And so, of course, if that has happened, you're going to get an unassigned referenced exception down here. So check your console for any red messages of doom. Same thing for the enemy. Of course, the enemy should be chasing you. If the enemy's not chasing you, that was several videos ago. You need to go back and review those videos. The enemy should chase you. And as you can see, it's not the smartest tool in the shed. It's going to run to exactly where the player was. But again, if you don't get the you lose message, double check. I mean, the enemy shouldn't be chasing you anyways if you don't have your tag, but always check that. Make sure your tag is correct. Make sure that vision and detect are both triggers. And again, just make sure that GameLogic has everything linked up. And assuming that everything is working correctly, we are now ready to move on to creating content or a single level, which we will do in the next video. As always, if you have found this video useful and or entertaining, a thumbs up would be appreciated. And if you didn't like it or is a colossal waste of time, well, thumbs down button is right next to it. Until the next video.